There is a specific kind of silence that settles over your life right before everything changes, a quiet heavy with the weight of unanswered prayers. You spent months, perhaps years, pleading for clarity, begging to understand why the person who claimed to love you the most was the very one driving you into the shadows of your own mind. You felt it in your bones that something was deeply wrong, yet you couldn't find the words to prove it. Have you ever noticed how they looked at you when you finally stopped arguing, as if they had successfully rewritten your reality right in front of your eyes? You weren't crazy, and you weren't just being too sensitive, though they hammered those exact phrases into your consciousness day after day. You were sitting in the dark, desperately holding a flickering match of intuition, while they convinced everyone else you were the one holding the fire. Nobody talks about this, but the absolute most exhausting part of walking through that psychological fog wasn't the overt cruelty. It was the subtle, invisible erosion of your faith. You began to wonder if God had completely forgotten about you, or worse, if he was watching your slow unraveling and choosing to remain silent. You pleaded for a sign, for a breakthrough, or just for a single day where your soul didn't feel entirely bruised. You knew something was wrong during those late-night moments when you found yourself searching the internet for answers to questions you were too ashamed to ask your closest friends. You were looking for a lifeline because the person sharing your bed or your home had turned your life into a confusing maze of shifting goalposts. Every single boundary you tried to set was treated like an act of war, leaving you stranded in your own exhaustion. The moment you began to question your own memory was the exact moment their system was working precisely as they intended it to. They needed you to doubt what you saw with your own eyes and what you heard with your own ears so that they could become the sole author of your truth. You carried the heavy burden of their hidden malice, protecting their fragile public reputation while your own spirit was slowly turning to ash. It is a terrifying realization when you realize that the person who promised to protect your heart is actually the one secretly orchestrating its breaking. You spent so much time giving them the benefit of the doubt, giving them endless chances to finally do the right thing, because you couldn't fathom a mind that operates purely on manipulation. You measured their capacity for empathy by your own, and that was your only real mistake. You felt the physical toll of that emotional warfare in your shoulders, in the constant pit in your stomach, and in the way your heart raced whenever their name appeared on your phone. Your body was screaming the truth to you long before your mind was ready to accept it. It was trying to tell you that you were living in a psychological war zone, surviving on the breadcrumbs of a love that never actually existed in reality. But there is a ceiling to how much pain a human soul can absorb before the divine order of things decides that enough is finally enough. You didn't realize it at the time, but your tears were being counted, and your silent cries in the dark were echoing in places far higher than their manipulation could ever reach. The agonizing season of your confusion was not a permanent sentence. It was actually the necessary labor pains of your rescue. What you endured wasn't just a string of bad relational communication or a standard rough patch that every couple goes through. It was a targeted campaign against your identity. They wanted to see how much of yourself you would willingly surrender just to keep a false peace. You reached a point of total depletion where you had nothing left to give, and that is exactly where the divine intervention began to take place. You thought you were completely alone in that valley, but the truth is that the veil was about to be pulled back in a way that would shatter their entire illusion. The very cover of darkness they used to distort your perception was suddenly hit by a blinding, inescapable light. This is where the narrative shifts completely, because when the divine decides to uncover the truth, no amount of narcissistic damage control can stop it. Chapter 2: Psychological Revelation. What most people never realize about the moment of divine exposure is that it rarely begins with a loud explosion. It starts with a subtle shift in your internal awareness. Suddenly, the excuses you used to make for their erratic behavior simply stop working in your mind. The veil drops, and for the very first time, you see their actions not through the lens of your hope, but through the clear lens of their actual behavior. Here's what was really happening behind the scenes while you were drowning in confusion. The universe was systematically closing the doors that kept you bound to their toxic cycle. Every time you tried to force the relationship to work and met a wall of cold indifference, it wasn't a punishment from above. It was a severe mercy, a divine intervention preventing you from settling for a lifetime of psychological captivity. The part nobody tells you about this awakening is how quiet it actually feels when the truth finally anchors itself into your spirit. You stop texting back long paragraphs explaining your feelings because you suddenly realize they never lacked understanding. They only lacked care. They needed your constant explanations because it proved to them that they still held total control over your emotional stability. This is where it gets disturbing for the narcissist who thought they had mastered your psychology. They had built an entire kingdom based on the predictability of your forgiveness and your endless empathy. They knew exactly which buttons to push to make you apologize for things you never did, but suddenly, those buttons stop working entirely. You look at them, and the familiar emotional hooks simply slide right off your back. When they accused you of exactly what they were doing themselves, they weren't just projecting. They were trying to transfer their own internal shame onto your clean ledger. But when the light of revelation hits, that psychological mirror shatters completely. You no longer accept the heavy baggage of their flaws, and you hand their projections back to them without an ounce of anger, just an unshakable sense of clarity. They needed your attention the way a fire needs oxygen to survive, and they didn't care if that attention came from your joy or your absolute devastation. But the moment God reveals the truth to you, your supply of emotional oxygen completely dries up. You become a stone wall to their drama, a calm sea that their manufactured storms can no longer disturb, and this silent withdrawal of your energy shifts the power dynamics. This changes everything because the narcissist realizes that they are no longer dealing with the wounded version of you that they easily managed. They are now dealing with someone whose eyes have been opened by a higher power, and you cannot manipulate someone who can see right through the illusion. The clever scripts they use to twist reality suddenly sound incredibly hollow, childish, and transparent to your ears. And that's when the truth appears in its most raw form. They were never as powerful as they pretended to be. They were merely banking on your deep fear of losing them. Once the divine removes that specific fear from your heart, you become completely dangerous to their system of control. The grand illusionist is suddenly standing on an empty stage with all the house lights turned on, exposed to the core. You begin to see that their behavior towards you was never actually about your worth or your value as a human being. It was entirely about their own internal deficit. They targeted your light because their own interior world was a dark, echoing chamber of insecurity and deep self-loathing. They wanted to pull you down into that darkness with them so they wouldn't have to look at their own reflection alone. This revelation is the exact point where your healing transforms from a distant, desperate wish into an active, unfolding reality. You stop asking why they did what they did, and you start seeing the profound beauty of who you are becoming because they failed to destroy you. The psychological traps they meticulously set for your destruction have turned into the exact stepping stones of your spiritual awakening. Chapter 3. The Plot Twist. You thought they forgot about you the moment they walked away or replaced you with someone else so effortlessly. You assumed they were living a blissful, consequence-free life while you were left alone to pick up the broken pieces of your shattered world. But the truth is much darker, and it introduces a massive reversal that they never saw coming in their wildest calculations. They never stopped monitoring you, even when they pretended you no longer existed to them. Narcissists do not simply walk away from a source of high-quality supply. They keep an eye on the perimeter to see how long it takes for you to completely collapse without them. They expected to see you broken, desperate, and pleading for their return, because that validation is what keeps their fragile ego inflated. You thought you were weak during those long months of crying on your kitchen floor, feeling like you couldn't take another step forward. But the plot twist is that you weren't breaking down, you were actually breaking open. You were surviving the withdrawal of an intense addiction to trauma bonds, and every single day you chose not to break your silence was an act of monumental, supernatural strength. You believed they had won the battle because they walked away with the superficial prizes, the mutual friends, the false narrative, or the material things. But the divine plot twist is that they actually lost the only thing of true value in their entire life. They lost access to your pure soul. They were traded out of a position of absolute privilege because they proved they were entirely unworthy of your sacred energy. While they were busy celebrating what they thought was a victory over you, a silent spiritual foreclosure was taking place on their entire operation. The universe allowed them to exhaust all their manipulative tactics on you so that their pattern would be fully documented in heaven. The door to your life wasn't just closed by your own hand, it was locked from the outside by a higher authority. Now, they are looking across the horizon and seeing something that absolutely terrifies them. You are not falling apart without them. In fact, you are beginning to thrive in ways that seem completely impossible given the amount of damage they inflicted. The color is returning to your face, the laughter is returning to your voice, and your life is starting to expand beautifully in their total absence. They thought they had buried you deep in the dirt where nobody would ever find you again, but they completely forgot that you were a seed. The very pressure they applied to crush you into submission only forced your roots to grow deeper into the truth. The dark season they designed to be your permanent grave has actually become the fertile ground for your ultimate spiritual promotion. This is where the narcissist's profound panic begins to set in like a sudden, icy fever. They realize that their smear campaign is failing to stick because the quiet dignity of your life speaks louder than all of their calculated lies. People are starting to look at them with questions in their eyes, noticing the glaring discrepancy between who they say you are and who you actually show up as. They are realizing with absolute horror that they cannot recreate the specific magic you brought into their life with anyone else. They try to plug new people into the slots you used to occupy, but the counterfeits cannot match the depth of the original. They are left holding an empty copy, realizing too late that they traded a diamond for a handful of cheap, common gravel. The ultimate plot twist of your entire journey is that the very enemy sent to destroy your life ended up being the catalyst that pushed you into your true purpose. They wanted to make you small, but they accidentally forced you to become too big for their small world. By trying to completely break you, they inadvertently taught you that you are entirely unbreakable under God. Chapter 4. The Narcissist's Consequences. True justice in the aftermath of narcissistic abuse does not look like a dramatic public confrontation or an admission of guilt that you will never receive. It looks like the slow, inevitable unfolding of the natural laws of reality catching up to a life built entirely on deceit. The narcissist is starting to realize that the spiritual immunity they thought they possessed has officially expired. The panic they are experiencing right now is rooted in a profound sense of exposure that they cannot seem to escape. They can sense that the atmosphere has changed and that their usual tricks are no longer yielding the same results. It is the terrifying realization that they have run out of fresh soil to plant their lies in, and the old ground is completely sour. When God reveals everything, it means the narcissist's internal reality becomes a prison of their own making. They are forced to live with the constant, gnawing paranoia that someone is going to find out who they truly are beneath the mask. They look around at their current relationships and realize that not a single one of them is built on a foundation of genuine truth or safety. This lack of authentic intimacy is the ultimate psychological consequence that they must carry every single day of their existence. They are surrounded by people, yet they are profoundly, intensely isolated because nobody actually knows the real person behind the curtain. They must constantly maintain the exhausting performance of their false self, knowing that a single slip will bring it all down. Watch how they desperately scramble to find new distractions, new projects, or new victims to keep the deep inner silence at bay. They cannot sit alone with their own thoughts for even a few minutes because the echoes of their past betrayals start whispering in the quiet. The memory of how they treated you sits like a heavy, cold weight in the back of their mind. They are panicking because they have finally realized that you are truly gone and that no amount of hoovering or manipulation will ever win you back. They used to enjoy the game of pushing you away just to see how hard you would fight to come back to them. Now, they are realizing that when you walked away, you didn't just leave the room, you left the entire stadium. The natural consequence of their behavior is a life that gradually shrinks until it becomes entirely hollow and devoid of genuine joy. They can acquire all the material success, titles, and superficial praise they want, but it feels like ash in their mouth. They are perpetually hungry for validation, condemned to chase a high that requires more and more effort for less and less return. They see the undeniable hand of protection over your life now, and it fills them with a bitter, burning resentment that they cannot express openly. They want so badly to see you fail so they can feel validated in their mistreatment of you. Instead, they are forced to witness your steady ascent, watching from a distance as the universe rewards the very integrity they tried to break. Their panic increases as they realize that they have lost the power to provoke you into a reaction anymore. Your indifference is a far more devastating consequence to their ego than your anger could ever be. Your complete silence tells them that they are no longer important enough to even warrant a response, reducing their grand significance down to absolute nothingness. In the end, the justice is found in the complete reversal of your roles in this story. They tried to leave you trapped in a state of perpetual emotional bankruptcy, but they are the ones who ended up completely bankrupt of soul, love, and peace. They must continue to play their exhausting games forever, while you have been granted a full exit visa from their chaos. Chapter 5. Survivor Empowerment and Emotional Freedom. Now, the spotlight of this story must shift entirely away from the theater of their panic and land squarely on your incredible restoration. The season of focusing on what they did, how they did it, and why they did it is officially coming to a close. You are stepping into a beautiful new chapter where your energy belongs exclusively to your own healing and expansion. Emotional freedom begins the moment you realize that you no longer need them to apologize or validate your experience in order for you to move forward. You have received a higher validation from the divine truth that rescued you from that emotional pit. Their silence is no longer a source of pain. It is a beautiful, protective boundary that keeps your life clean. You are beginning to trust your own intuition again, learning to honor that quiet inner voice that you ignored for far too long during the abuse. When something feels off now, you don't stay to investigate or argue. You simply pivot and protect your peace without explanation. You have developed a beautiful, sacred intolerance for anything that threatens your alignment. Look closely at how much space has opened up in your mind now that you are no longer spending hours analyzing their confusing mixed signals. That mental real estate has been returned to you, allowing you to dream, create, and build a life that feels authentic to your core. The exhaustion is lifting, replaced by a steady, quiet vitality that belongs entirely to you. You are discovering that the empathy and love you poured into that black hole of a relationship was never actually lost or wasted. It was merely returned to sender, redirecting itself back into your own life where it can finally bear beautiful fruit. You are learning to treat yourself with the exact same tenderness and patience that you used to waste on them. The healing journey is not about becoming a hardened, cynical version of yourself who is too afraid to ever trust love again. It is about becoming so anchored in your own self-worth and divine protection that no manipulator can ever shake your foundation. You are soft where it matters, but you are absolutely made of steel where your boundaries are concerned. You can look back at the version of you that entered that relationship not with shame or regret, but with a profound, weeping gratitude for their survival. That version of you endured the absolute worst of psychological warfare just so that the person sitting here today could breathe free air. You are the living answer to the prayers you offered up in your darkest hours. The divine has restored your clarity, your joy, and your destiny in a way that makes the pain of the past look incredibly small by comparison. What was intended to be the definitive end of your story has actually been repurposed into the powerful opening line of your true beginning. You are no longer defined by what you survived. You are defined by how beautifully you arose. Let the narcissist panic in the dark corners of their own self-created illusions while you step out boldly into the bright warmth of your freedom. You have been weighed, you have been tested, and you have been pulled out of the fire by a hand far stronger than any human malice. Your path ahead is completely clear, wide open, and filled with an abundance of genuine peace. The ultimate victory of your journey is that you survived their calculated attempt to make you hate your own beautiful heart. You emerged from that dark valley with your capacity to love, your integrity, and your faith completely intact. The greatest punishment for a narcissist is watching the person they tried to break finally become impossible to control.